On today's Locked On Giants podcast, head coach Brian Daboll's been cooking up some stuff in his lab. We're going to talk about some of the creativity we have seen on offense thus far this summer, what it means, and a whole lot more here on the Locked On Giants podcast coming your way next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. It's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI.com. That's where you can find my written work. And as always, a welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And don't forget, if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. Ring the little notification bell. I've been trying to post at least one short after practice every day now that we're in training camp. And of course, like the video, if you wouldn't mind. It all helps, the bottom line. So it is appreciated. And on today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to talk about head coach Brian Daboll's creativity. Daboll's been calling the plays basically since the spring. So what are some of the things we're seeing that has me excited, and I think will have you guys excited? So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to tell you the benefits of some of these things that Daboll has kind of shown thus far in the first couple of days of practice. Then in segment 2, we're going to talk about some of the battles of training camp. Some interesting battles here, but not all battles are quite what they seem, and I'll explain what that means when we get to segment 2. And then finally in segment 3, I have some offensive line thoughts. Yeah, we're going to go there, kind of talk about the offensive line because it's so important, this unit. So I have a couple thoughts that I'll give you to wrap up the show. Okay, again, welcome on in. Let's start with the mad scientist, as I call him, Brian Daboll, head coach. Folks, I asked him on the first day of camp, I said, did you make a decision on play calling? And he says, I'm going to still work through it. We know he's going to call the plays. I mean, the guy's just having way too much fun with the radio in his hand, walking around. I mean, you can just see the pep in his step. You can see, hear it in his voice. Those of us who get close enough to hear, the plays that are going in. And he's just having a great old time. So, there's no doubt that he's going to call the plays. But what have we seen from Daboll calling the plays so far? Well, there's a lot, quite honestly, that has me excited. So let me run down that list for you. First off, more pre-snap motion. And I'm not just talking one guy going in motion, folks. I'm talking as many as 3 guys will shift around before the snap. And I like it. And I'll tell you why I like it. Because it creates confusion for the defense because they don't know what's coming at them. And it's going to help Daniel Jones with his post-snap reads. Okay, so Daniel Jones can get an idea pre-snap first, what the defense might do in response to all the movement. And then once, everything is kind of set, now it should help him with post-snap because he'll have a better idea, hopefully, of, where the weaknesses are going to be in the defense. Because look, the defense can only adjust up to a certain point. The offense has the advantage. And when you have the pre-snap motion, you can create all kinds of confusion and deception and whatnot. So just another little thing that I think is going to help Daniel Jones that not only a lot of people are talking about, but I think is going to be so important. So pre-snap motion, definitely in there. All right, what about creativity? A few things actually here. Number 1, we've seen a whole lot more of 10 personnel. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with, the personnel packages, the first number represents the number of running backs. The second number represents the number of tight ends on any given play that are on the field. So 10 personnel would be one running back, no tight ends, 4 wide receivers. And we have seen a lot so far, 4 wide receiver sets. This is a staple that Daboll ran up in Buffalo when he was, the last year of his tenure up there as offensive coordinator, and he had some success with it. So we have seen that in camp, and thus far, those plays have been pretty successful. Again, when you've got as deep of a wide receiver class as the Giants have, why not put them on the field? Especially if you still have questions about your tight end group. Daniel Bellinger, he's a decent pass catcher, but not really a yards after the catch guy. Theo Johnson's currently on the shelf. Lawrence Cager, he's competing, not a bad tight end, but again, not a big yards after the catch guy. And Chris Manhertz, who's been running with the ones of late, he's more of a blocker. So why not lean into the strength of your offense, which in this case for the Giants is the receiving corps. All right. So that's another thing we have seen. Okay. This next one I want to talk about, I think is really kind of clever here. And that is what I call mixed tempo. All right. So what I mean by that is on some plays, you see the Giants go into a huddle and then they break the huddle and they dash to the line of scrimmage. Then there are other plays where you see them head to the line of scrimmage at a normal pace. And then there are some where they do that muddle huddle type deal where it's not quite a huddle, but they're getting the play in on the fly. And then you have some cases where they have no huddle. So Daboll has been mixing that up somewhat to keep the defense off balance. And, we talk about how every year at the start of camp, the defense always looks better than the offense. And that's because the offense maybe looks a little rusty. But this year through 2 practices, I can't honestly say that the offenses look horrible. In past years, I can maybe say that, that the first couple of practices, the first 3 or 4 practices, the offense looked like it's not in sync. Can't really say that so far this year. So I really like, what Daboll is doing. And, I don't know how much of what he's doing now is going to make it into the final playbook. I sure hope a lot of this stuff does, because the creativity, and oh, by the way, there's also been some nice jet sweeps and end arounds and double end arounds and all kinds of little gadget plays, taking advantage of, the speed of a Wan'Dale Robinson, even Malik Neighbors, running some of those plays out of the backfield. So there's all kinds of cool things that Daboll has been trying out so far this summer. I'm dying to see what makes it into the regular season, because a lot of this stuff really, really looks promising. And, I think some of it also maybe takes some of the onus off of the offensive line, which, as we know, we've got to see if that thing comes together. But, some of this creativity, I think, is going to also help the offensive line, in addition to, like I said, helping Daniel Jones, the quarterback, and just overall making the offense better and run more efficiently. So the mad scientist, as I've been calling him, Brian Daboll, whipping up some creative stuff. I'm sure it's not all his doing. I'm sure it's been like a contribution from the staff. But again, Daboll's going to be the one calling the plays. And oh, by the way, him calling the plays, he's been calmer. He's also been, more, I guess, more involved with the offense. Okay. The calm part is a big thing, because on the sideline, as we saw last year, Daboll was often quick to pop a cork if something went wrong. Now that he kind of has, quote unquote, something to do consistently, as opposed to, just, okay, maybe we should throw a challenge flag here, or maybe we should call a timeout here. Now he's got something to really focus on, and it happens to be something that he's good at. So I think that's going to help the sideline dynamics tremendously if he does indeed, make it official and say, yeah, I'm calling the plays this year. So I think that's where it's going. I've been saying that all along now, and, it's just a matter of him making it official. So we'll see when that is. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the training camp battles we have seen so far, and why not all the battles are what you think they are. So don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's guaranteed fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. And with all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So go on and keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And before I get into this next segment, I know some of you have asked me about the Blue Crew community that I always mention at the start of every show. And information on joining the Blue Crew community, which is basically an exclusive group of listeners to the Locked On Giants podcast with whom I communicate. I try to communicate with them every day, at least once a day, with training camp updates, stats, little tidbits that maybe I don't talk about here on the podcast or write about over on New York Giants on SI.com. So it's basically, a little community, if you will. And, they text me questions and stuff like that, and I text them back. We try and do a mailbag. Now that, we're in training camp, we're going to start up our mailbag once a week. So there's information on how to check that out in the show notes. It's a free 14-day trial. If you like it, you do nothing. And I believe it's $4.99 a month thereafter. If you don't like it after if you cancel before your 14-day trial is up, you owe nothing and you will have tried it out. So do check that out and consider giving us a try. I think you'll like the Blue Crew community. I know I enjoy taking part in it, and I think you'll enjoy it as well. All right, in this segment, we're going to talk about some of the training camp battles that we have seen so far and why some of them are not quite what they appear to be. And I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. But let's talk about some of the legitimate battles, the real battles that are going on. At slot cornerback, you have Nick McCloud versus Darnay Holmes. Nick McCloud seems to be the front runner for that job. Kind of interesting because Nick McCloud's also their best special teams player. At least he was last year. So, that's kind of interesting that they're leaning more towards him. Drew Phillips, who they drafted for the role, not quite there yet. He's working towards it, but Nick McCloud right now seems to be the front runner for that slot cornerback job. I think the competition here at receiver, I think we have something here between Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt. And I mention that because, you look at the top of the depth chart at receiver, you figure it's going to be Malik Neighbors. You would think Darius Slayton. You would think Wan'Dale Robinson and Jalen Hyatt, those four. But I'm wondering now, just based on what I've seen and how the snaps have been distributed, is it going to be Slayton versus Hyatt? And if Hyatt wins that job, which he should, do they maybe look to move Slayton for maybe, I don't know, a 5th round pick, a 6th round pick or something? Right? I think they can get a draft pick for Slayton. I know some of you out there are like, well, what could they possibly get a value? Look, if you're Joe Schoen, you want to start collecting draft picks so that if you need to move up next year to get a quarterback, you have extra assets in your bank that you can use. So I would not be surprised if Darius Slayton does get moved if he ends up losing the competition, which appears to be with Jalen Hyatt. Okay, at running back. For running back 2, you've got Tyrone Tracy and Eric Gray. Folks, right now, for some reason, I think Tracy is actually in the lead here over Gray. Now, Tracy, of course, is the rookie. Eric Gray is second-year player. I watched the two of them, they haven't really done, running plays just yet because, that'll come with the pads. But I watched them, in the passing game and, drills and stuff like that. And to me, Tracy just looks smoother. He looks more polished. His route running is still not, as crisp as you'd like it to be at this level, but it just seems a lot better, less herky-jerky than Gray's. And his hands seem to be a lot better than Gray's, whereas I've seen Gray drop easy passes. Tracy has caught them, and managed to hang on to them, whether they're easy, between the numbers or if they're off target a little bit. So I think right now. And again, it's early, but Tracy appears to be in the lead for that RB2 spot behind Devin Singletary. Now, this is an interesting one. I'm not surprised that it's happening given, what happened last year, but at inside linebacker, you've got Deontay Johnson against Micah McFadden. All right. Now, Micah McFadden last year led the Giants and and missed tackles. He was the team's missed tackle leader. And that was a big, big problem in his game. Now, Deontay Johnson, who, initially you see his name pop up on the list and you think, training camp fodder. No, he's been getting first team reps. Okay. So I suspect the coaches like what they've seen from him. And, he's actually getting first team reps ahead of, Darius Mawaso, who was the 6th-round draft pick this year, Darian Beavers, who seems to be the forgotten guy. And of course, there's Carter Coughlin, who's more of a special teams guy. Not much from Matthew Adams either, which is kind of surprising because I figured maybe he might get his spot due to his special teams prowess, but they haven't really done special teams full blasts. That's going to come when they have the joint practices against the Lions. So we'll find out more about that when they have the joint practices starting a week from this coming Monday. Now, when I talked about, there are some battles that are going on that aren't what they appear to be. Here's what I mean by that. One of the things this coaching staff does is they will mix and match guys at different levels just to see how they look. So, for example, Daniel Bellinger right now is tight end 1, but there have been times when he's been playing with the third string offense, and you've seen Lawrence Cager, who was projected as tight end 3, working with the ones. You have seen Chris Manhertz working with the ones. And I think the reason for that is so that if there is ever an injury, let's see how these guys operate with the ones, because that's what's going to happen. Last year we talked about how with the offensive line, there were certain guys that never got snaps with the ones at certain positions, and we saw what a mess that was. So that's kind of a lesson I think they learned, which is to, mix and match. Another one that I'll talk about, Trey Hawkins has been taking some of the snaps from Deonte Banks. Okay. And you're like, wait a minute, Deonte Banks, man, he's a starter. Why is he splitting snaps with Trey Hawkins? Again, I think it's to give Trey Hawkins snaps with the first team defense, just in case Deonte Banks can't play or Cordell flops. Okay. So that's what I mean when I say that not all training camp battles are considered equal. There are some legitimate ones out there where guys are jockeying for position. And then there are some where it's just a matter of seeing how these guys look, these backups or maybe potential third string guys. How do they look with the first team offense or defense? So that's what I mean when I say they're not all created equal. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, the offensive line. I've got a few thoughts about that unit. I'll tell you what they are, including a concern that I have. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. They help you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but who might be open to the perfect role. 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours when they use LinkedIn. And did you know that LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier? They've just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Find out why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring by posting your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And before I get into this next segment, yes, folks, there will be a show tomorrow tomorrow for Saturday, because as long as the Giants are practicing, I'm going to give you a show. I'm going to go through, the key points of what we learned and everything like that. So the Giants are practicing Friday. Normally, this would have been my last show of the week, but we're just going to keep going because, you guys want it. So I'm here to please. So my way of saying thanks, as always, for tuning in. All right. This next segment, we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, the offensive line. Now, I was writing down some thoughts today in between plays on practice, things that kind of just popped into my head to where I was like, how good do I really feel about this offensive line? Now, you don't know what you have with the offensive line until they put the pads on. I want to make that clear. So I'm not here to say, oh my God, I'm really worried about the offensive line because, they stink, or, this is a problem or that's a problem. I did see a few good things today that I want to talk about. And the one thing, that I think needs to be mentioned was the play of Joshua Ezeudu, who filled in for Jermaine Eluemunor at right tackle. Jermaine Eluemunor, by the way, for those who didn't get the update, the short that I posted earlier today, he's fine. Bruised ribs. He escaped a serious injury with broken ribs. He was limited in that he only did individuals. He did not do the team drills because he's sore. But hey, and God bless this guy. He said, hey, I've been in the league for 8 years and I've never missed a training camp practice, and I'm not going to start now. How often do you hear a veteran say that? Most veterans hate training camp. And Eluemunor is sitting there saying, I love it. I want to be out there every moment I can. So, I mean, gosh, if you don't love this guy by now, then I don't know what to tell you. He's amazing. So anyway, Josh Ezeudu was the right tackle, and they're kind of grooming him to be the swing tackle there. The positive that I took away from Josh Ezeudu's performance today is that he kept his edge clean. All right. So he primarily went up a lot against Kayvon Thibodeau, which is not an easy task. And, maybe it didn't look pretty all the time, but the one thing Ezeudu did that I got to think earned him, high points from the coaching staffs when they looked at the tape afterwards, he stayed in front of Thibodeau. He didn't get turned to the side. So, you watch with an offensive lineman, when they get turned to the side where their back is facing either sideline, now it becomes too easy for the defensive guy to slide off of him and get around him and into, the backfield. Ezeudu didn't give up any such, instances where he was turned sideways. So, the showing itself wasn't pretty. And remember, they're not doing contact yet because they don't have the pads on. So when they put the pads on, you're really going to be able to appreciate it. But, usually when there's no pads, the advantage goes to the defense. And Ezeudu did a good job, in my opinion, of just keeping Thibodeau at bay. Meanwhile, Azeez Ojulari with the second team, Azeez Ojulari had some better luck against the right tackle. I think it was Miles was the right tackle, if I'm not mistaken, Joshua Miles. But, I just wanted to give a shout out to Joshua Ezeudu because I thought he had a good practice, and probably not something that got mentioned a whole lot. Before the start of practice, John Runyon, who, if you saw in Hard Knocks, episode 4, it was mentioned that Runyon can play some center if they need him to. John Runyon was doing some snapping. Quite honestly, the backup snappers, Jimmy Morrissey and Schlottman, I don't know, man. I mean, I know it's early, but Morrissey sent a snap over the head of I think it was Drew Lock. There's been some snap problems. So, as the Giants kind of figure out how many they're going to keep and what they're going to keep, they might not be able to keep, like a I don't know, a Schlottman who can back up at center and guard. They may have to just say, all right, you know what, John Runyon, you're going to be our backup center because we have to now keep an extra tackle or an extra guard or whatever the case may be. So that's something to keep an eye on as we go through the rest of the summer and into the preseason. Now, the concern I have about this unit, and if this didn't emphasize it, I don't know what else will. But when we had the Jermaine Eluemunor injury scare, the question now became, uh-oh, who's the backup tackle? Who's the swing guy? And I mentioned, Joshua Zudu, did a good job today, didn't get turned around, but, the technique is still a little off. You can see that there's inconsistencies with what he does. And sometimes I thought he got away with holding, to be honest with you. But again, he never got turned to where his back was to either sideline, which is the plus. But you sit there and you say, okay, who's going to be the backup tackle? What kind of tackle depth does this team have? Evan Neal, I don't know when he's coming back. I know Joe Shane said he's not that far off, but, he's got to, I think, be out there and actually be doing stuff, and right now, today, for example, he was inside, doing his rehab work inside the building for the first hour, and then he walked out and joined his teammates and was standing there just watching. So for me, until I see him actually doing something besides running, I mean, till I see him, in his pass block, stance, retreating, forging ahead, working with a sled, to me, he's not close. I don't know what Joe Shane considers close, but he's got to get out there and he's got to start doing some more advanced stuff. And we have not seen that yet. So, who knows when he's going to be ready? Okay, so that being said, Eluemunor goes down, Zudo steps in. All right, now, God forbid this should happen, but let's say Eluemunor couldn't play and you have Zudo and Andrew Thomas. Now what do? Who's your other backup? I just feel like they don't have sufficient depth at offensive tackle still. They have plenty of guards and interior linemen. They don't, in my mind, have enough at the tackle spot. And gosh, I sure hope it doesn't come back to bite them. I think, if I'm Joe Shane, the injury scare to Jermaine Eluemunor is kind of a wake-up call to me that maybe I might want to bring in another, decent offensive lineman, particularly if one gets cut later on in the summer. But that was a concern for me, and it's still a question mark because, like I said, injuries are going to happen. They always do with this team, and especially on the offensive line. You better have enough depth. And as we saw last year, if you don't have quality depth ready to step in, you're in trouble. So hopefully the Giants stay healthy and they don't have to worry about this, but the odds of that happening, not very good. All right, Giant fans, that is going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. As always, thank you for tuning in and making us part of your day. Please keep it here over the weekend. Again, I'll have another show for you. And then we're right back on Sunday. There's a practice. I won't be at that practice, but I'll be back on Monday when the pads go on. So obviously I'll have a show for you because the pads will be popping and that'll be a lot of fun to talk about and cover. So make sure you keep it here all week long, all next week, and all, the rest of the way as we are here for you 5 days a week on the Locked On Giants podcast. Until next time, Giant fans, have a good one.